Story 1. The echo in the trees. This happened back in the summer of 2019. I was 21 years old at the time, living back at home with my parents for the season. It was one of those humid, dragging summers where the days felt endless, and I found myself itching for a bit of solitude. My parents' property backed up onto a massive stretch of woodlands. These weren't your typical suburban patch of trees. This was vast, dense, and largely unexplored acreage that stretched on for miles without any maintained trails or roads. I've always been the impulsive type. One Tuesday morning, I woke up, looked out at the tree line swaying in the wind, and decided, I'm going out there tonight. It wasn't a planned expedition. I didn't tell any friends. I just wanted to disconnect, sleep on the ground, and stare at a fire. I camped back there a dozen times growing up, so it didn't feel like a risk. Felt like my backyard. I packed my rucksack with the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, flashlight, some food, and let my parents know I'd be back the next morning. By 4 p.m., I was crossing the threshold from the manicured lawn into the tall brush. I hiked for a solid hour, pushing through thickets of thorns and climbing over fallen, rotting logs. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. Eventually, I found a small clearing that looked perfect. The canopy opened up just enough to let the golden hour sunlight pour through. I set up my tent, cleared away the dry leaves to make a fire ring, and got a small blaze going. For the first hour, it was paradise. I sat there watching the flames dance, feeling that specific kind of relaxation you only get when your phone has no service. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and bruised oranges. But just as the sun was crowning the tops of the trees, the silence broke. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it came again. A voice, a male voice. It was faint, drifting through the trees. It sounded like muttering, a low, rhythmic cadence of speech that I couldn't quite make out. I sat up straighter, straining my ears. The acoustics in the woods can be tricky. Sounds bounce off tree trunks and get swallowed by the brush. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I checked my watch. The sun was almost gone. The shadows were lengthening, turning the trees into long, dark fingers stretching across the forest floor. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a hiker? But there were no trails here. You had to bushwhack to get to this spot. The likelihood of someone just passing through this specific patch of nowhere was astronomically low. I sat frozen for 5 minutes. The voice didn't stop. It wasn't getting closer, but it wasn't fading away either. It was stationary. That was what unnerved me. If it was a hiker, the sound would move. This person was standing still, somewhere just out of sight, talking to themselves. The creeping feeling of dread started in my stomach. I stood up and cupped my hands around my mouth. "Hello!" I yelled. The reaction was instant. Before the "oh" sound even finished leaving my lips, the voice cut out. Snap. Silence. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was as if someone had hit a mute button. The sudden quiet was heavy, heavier than it had been before. I waited, heart hammering against my ribs, for a response. "Is anyone there?" I called again, louder this time. Nothing. Just the wind rustling the upper branches. Now, the creep factor was at an 11. My brain started spiraling. Why would someone be out here? Why were they muttering? And why, upon hearing another person, would they go dead silent instead of saying hello back? I looked at the sky. I had maybe 20-30 minutes of usable light left. I made a snap decision. I wasn't staying here. I didn't want to be sitting in a tent wondering who was standing in the dark 50 yards away. I grabbed my gear. I didn't even bother packing it neatly. I stuffed the tent into the bag, kicked dirt over the fire, and moved. I headed deeper into the woods, cutting a zigzag pattern, trying to put distance between me and that spot. I walked fast, bordering on a jog, for about 15 minutes. The light was failing fast. The woods turned from green to gray to black. I found another spot, less ideal, more cramped by trees, but it would have to do. By the time I got the tent back up, It was full night, pitch black. I sat in the dark for a while, listening. The woods were dead silent. No muttering. No footsteps. Just the crickets. I started to calm down. You're overreacting, I told myself. It was probably just the wind, or an animal, or your imagination. I decided to build another fire. I needed the comfort. I gathered some twigs, got a flame going, and the warm glow pushed back the darkness. I felt safe again. I broke out the marshmallows, found a good stick, and started roasting them. There's something primal about a fire. It makes you feel protected. I spent hours like that. I ate s'mores, stared into the coals, and let my guard down. It must have been late, maybe 11 p.m. or midnight. The fire had died down to a bed of glowing red embers, giving off just a faint, dying light. Then I heard it. Crunch. It was the unmistakable sound of a heavy boot stepping on dry autumn leaves. Came from directly behind me, over my left shoulder. My blood ran cold. I froze, the half-eaten marshmallow in my hand trembling. I didn't turn around immediately. I listened. Silence again. Whoever it was had taken a step and then stopped. I slowly turned my head. It was pitch black beyond the small circle of firelight. I couldn't see anything but the trunks of trees. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. "I know someone is there." I didn't expect an answer. I expected silence like before. But then movement. From the woods, a man stepped into the dim glow of my fire. But, and this is the part that made my stomach drop, he didn't come from the left where I heard the crunch. He walked out from the right side of the campsite. He was tall, wearing dirty clothes that blended in with the bark. He had a disheveled look, like he had been out here for a long time. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. His voice was smooth, almost amused. He walked right up to my fire, uninvited, and sat down on a log across from me. He rubbed his hands together and held them out to the warmth of the embers. He acted like we were old friends. He acted like this was normal. My brain was misfiring. Can I help you?" I stammered. "I think you're at the wrong campsite." The man stared at the fire, the orange glow reflecting in his eyes. "No," he said simply. I didn't know what that meant. No, he couldn't be helped? No, he wasn't at the wrong campsite? The silence stretched out between us. It was thick, suffocating tension. I was assessing him. He looked stronger than me, and I was alone miles from my house. I needed to know if he was the one from earlier. "Do you?" I swallowed hard. "Do you happen to be the one I heard talking out in the trees around my other campsite earlier?" "About a mile back." The man didn't look up. He kept staring at the dying coals. But his face changed. The small, polite smile dropped. His expression went completely flat. "Dead. Must have been someone else," he said. His voice was devoid of emotion. A monotone drone. And then crack. A loud snap of a branch. Came from behind me again. To the back left. The exact spot where I had heard the initial footsteps. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The man in front of me hadn't made the noise behind me. He wasn't alone. I looked at the man across the fire. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were wide, cold, and predatory. He wasn't smiling. He was waiting. I didn't think. Instinct took over. I launched myself out of my camping chair, kicking it backward, and sprinted into the darkness. "Hey!" I heard the man shout. It wasn't a friendly shout. It was a bark of command. "Get him!" I heard heavy footsteps crashing through the brush behind me. 2 sets of them. I ran blind. Branches whipped my face, tearing at my skin. I tripped over roots, scrambled back up on my hands and knees, and kept running. I didn't care about the noise I was making. I just needed speed. I knew these woods better than they did, I hoped. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded. I didn't stop, though. I navigated by the stars and the slope of the land, moving toward where I knew the road was. I burst out of the tree line and onto my parents' back lawn an hour later, covered in scratches, dirt, and sweat. I pounded on the back door until my dad let me in. We called the police immediately. The next morning, I led a team of officers back into the woods. We found my campsite. It was destroyed. My tent was slashed to ribbons. My sleeping bag was gone. My cooler was overturned and emptied. Everything of value and even things of no value was gone. The police never found the men. But the thought that haunts me isn't just that they chased me. It's the coordination. One man flushed me out, distracted me with conversation, while the other circled behind me in the dark, getting into position. They were hunting. And if I hadn't run when that twig snapped, I don't think I would have ever left those woods. Story 2. The visitor at the lookout. There is a romantic idea about fire lookouts. You see the pictures on Instagram. Cozy, high above the world, watching the sunset over a sea of trees. Being an avid backpacker, I bought into that romance. I wanted that solitude. I found a rental online for a retired fire lookout station deep in the Cascade Mountains. It wasn't one of the popular ones. It was remote, miles from the nearest paved road, and accessible only by a grueling 5-hour hike up a mountain that hadn't seen maintenance in years. The listing photo was grainy, black and white from the 1950s. It looked isolated. It looked perfect. I arrived at the trailhead at 9 a.m. The hike was brutal. The trail was barely a deer path, overgrown with ferns and blocked by fallen cedar trees. It was wild, rugged country. By the time the trees broke and I saw the lookout, my legs were jelly. The tower wasn't the tall, stilt-legged kind you usually see. It was a squat cabin perched on a rocky outcropping, raised maybe 10 or 15 feet off the ground on a wooden foundation. It was old. The paint was peeling, the wood was gray and weathered. It was a glass box in the sky. I climbed the wraparound staircase, 20 steep steps, and dropped my pack on the deck. The view was breathtaking. Peak after peak stretched out into the horizon. I was the only human being for 20 miles. The cabin itself was sparse. Just a wooden floor, a wood stove, and windows on all 4 sides. No curtains, no blinds, and, unsettlingly, no lock on the door. Just a simple latch. I spent the evening cooking dinner on my camp stove and watching the sun go down. As night fell, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the old wood. I rolled out my sleeping bag on the floorboards around 8 p.m., exhausted from the climb. I was drifting off, hovering in that space between sleep and wakefulness, when I heard it. Steps. Heavy boots on wood. Thump, 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 coming up the stairs. My eyes snapped open. My heart hammered against the floorboards. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and stood up, facing the door. A moment later, a head popped up over the railing. It was a man. He looked to be in his late 40s, with stringy blonde hair that hung to his shoulders and a face weathered by the sun. He stepped onto the deck and looked through the glass at me. He didn't look surprised. He didn't jump. He just grinned. He opened the door without knocking. "Great place to stay a few nights, isn't it?" he said. His voice was gravelly, casual. I stood there, stunned. "Yeah," I managed to say. "It is." He walked in, looking around the empty room. "I was hoping to stay here tonight," he said, turning that grin on me. It didn't reach his eyes. My mind raced. I was alone. No cell service. No weapon. "Sorry," I lied, my voice shaking slightly. "I actually have a friend coming up. He's just a few minutes behind me on the trail." We booked the place for the next 3 nights. I watched him process this. I wanted him to think I wasn't alone. I wanted him to think another man was coming. The grin slowly faded from his face. He looked me up and down, assessing me. "Is that right?" he murmured. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, without another word, he nodded, turned around, and walked back out the door. I watched him go down the stairs, and that was when I noticed it. He had no backpack, no water bottle, no sleeping bag. We were 5 hours from the nearest road. The terrain was brutal. You don't just go for a casual evening stroll up here. To be up here without gear meant he was either sleeping in the woods with nothing, or I didn't know what it meant. I watched him disappear into the tree line below. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up, clutching my hiking poles, watching the stairs. Morning came, and with it, the sun. I felt silly in the daylight. Maybe he was just a weird day hiker? I decided to go down and get some water from the nearby spring. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. Taped to the wooden railing was a piece of notebook paper. On it, scrawled in black marker, was a single word. Sorry, smiley face. The smiley face was drawn with jagged lines. My stomach turned over. He had come back. In the middle of the night, while I was cowering upstairs, he had walked up these stairs, taped this note, and left. He knew I was awake. He was taunting me. I should have left then. But fear is a funny thing. Sometimes it freezes you. I told myself I had the high ground. I told myself he was gone. I spent the day scanning the woods with my binoculars, but I saw nothing. Just endless green. Night fell again. The second night was worse. I had a small, battery-powered lantern. I hung it from a hook in the ceiling to read by. But as soon as the sun went down, I realized my mistake. When you have a light on inside a glass box at night, you can't see out. The windows become mirrors. But anyone outside can see imperfectly. I was a fish in a glowing aquarium. I turned the light off, plunging the room into darkness. I sat there, listening to the wind. Around midnight, nature called. I held it as long as I could, but eventually I had to go. I grabbed the lantern, gripped my pocket knife, and walked down the stairs to the edge of the clearing. I switched the lantern on to navigate the rocks. The beam of light cut through the darkness and hit something standing at the tree line. A figure. I saw a flash of fabric, a movement of something shifting behind a large pine tree. Who's there? I screamed, swinging the light wildly. Silence. I didn't wait. I turned and sprinted back up the stairs, my heart beating so hard I thought I would vomit. I slammed the latchless door shut and piled my backpack and the heavy wood stove tools in front of it. I sat in the corner, away from the windows, shaking. I knew he was down there. I knew he was watching. I waited. 1 hour. 2 hours. I needed to see. The not knowing was driving me insane. I crawled across the floor to the window that overlooked the stairs. I pressed my face against the glass, shielding my eyes to block out reflections. The moon had come out, casting a pale, ghostly light over the clearing. There he was, the man with the blonde hair. He was standing at the very bottom of the stairs. His hand was resting on the railing. He wasn't moving. He wasn't coming up. He was just standing there, staring up at the cabin, staring at me. He stood like a statue. He had no gear. He was just waiting in the cold. I watched him for 2 agonizing minutes. I prayed he wouldn't take a step up. Then, slowly, he took a step backward. Then another. He turned and walked silently into the shadows beneath the walkway of the tower, disappearing from my view. I realized then that if I stayed, I was going to die. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but the predatory patience of this man was terrifying. I made a decision. I packed my bag in a frenzy. I kept glancing at the window, expecting to see his face pressed against the glass. I grabbed my lantern and my knife. I opened the door. The stairs were empty. I ran down them, skipping steps, and hit the trail. I didn't walk. I ran. I ran through the pitch-black forest, swinging my lantern, terrified that around every bend, he would be standing there waiting for me. I hiked for 5 hours in the dark, looking over my shoulder every 10 seconds. I made it to my car just as the sun was rising. I drove for 3 hours before I finally stopped shaking. I think back to that lie I told him. We booked it for 3 nights. He came back the first night. He came back the second night. He was escalating. He was testing boundaries. If I had stayed for that third night, if I had been there when he finally decided to come up those stairs, I don't think I would be telling this story. Story 3. The black truck on the Alaska Highway. The Alaska Highway. The Alcan is a bucket list drive for a reason. It cuts through some of the most beautiful and desolate country on Earth. Northern British Columbia and the Yukon are places where you can drive for hours and not see another soul. I was living my dream, traveling in a converted SUV, aiming to reach Alaska. I had spent months prepping. But there was one thing that made me nervous. Because I was crossing through Canada, I couldn't bring my firearm. I was used to having it under my seat for protection. Out here, without it, I felt naked. The first few days were fine. The isolation was majestic. But on the third day, the vibe changed. I was exhausted. The sun doesn't really set fully in the northern summers. It just dips into a twilight haze. I pulled off the main highway onto a small, unmarked dirt trail to camp for the night. I didn't inspect the site. I just crawled into the back of my SUV, put up my window shades, and passed out. The next morning, I woke up and stepped out to stretch. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards down the trail was another campsite. I walked over to check it out. It was a disaster scene. It looked like someone had left in a panic. There was a tent collapsed and half-torn. Clothes were scattered in the mud. A cooler was tipped over, food rotting in the dirt. It wasn't just messy. It felt violent. It looked like a struggle. My gut screamed at me, "Leave, now." I walked briskly back to my SUV. As I rounded the bush, I stopped. A truck had parked right next to me. It was a massive, lifted black pickup truck. Darkly tinted windows. No license plate on the front. It was idling silently. I couldn't see inside. I didn't know if anyone was looking at me, but I felt the weight of eyes. I jumped into my driver's seat, locked the doors, and tore out of there. I didn't look back. I drove for 4 hours straight. My fuel light came on. In that part of the Yukon, you don't skip gas stations. There was one coming up, an old, rundown outpost with a single pump. I pulled in. It was deserted. The wind howled across the gravel lot. I got out and started pumping gas. The silence was eerie. Then, dust on the horizon. A vehicle approaching. My stomach tightened. I watched as the black truck, the same one from the campsite, pulled into the station. There were empty pumps available. But the truck didn't go to them. It pulled up directly on the other side of my pump. I stood there, gripping the gas nozzle, my knuckles white. The truck sat there, engine rumbling. The windows were blacked out. The door didn't open. The driver didn't get out to pay or pump gas. He was just sitting there, waiting. I finished pumping, slammed the nozzle back, and jumped in my car. As I peeled onto the highway, I checked my rear view. The truck didn't move. It just sat there at the pump, facing the direction I had fled. I drove for the rest of the day, fueled by adrenaline. I wanted to put hundreds of miles between me and that truck. By 10 p.m., I felt safe. I was countless miles away. I found a campsite that was well hidden, deep in the brush, invisible from the road. I parked, but I didn't set up a tent. I didn't even go outside to cook. I stayed locked in the car. I ate a granola bar and watched movies on my phone to distract myself. Time passed. It got to be around 11:30 p.m. The woods were dark. Suddenly, I paused my movie. Crunch. Snap. Footsteps. Not the trot of an animal. The rhythmic, heavy cadence of boots on gravel. I sat up, my heart leaping into my throat. I looked toward the driver's side window. A face was pressed against the glass. It was a man. He was cupping his hands around his eyes, peering inside, inches from my face. I screamed. I threw myself backward into the passenger seat. The man recoiled into the dark. Then chaos erupted. Smash. The back window of my SUV exploded inward. Glass showered the interior. I looked back. A second man was there. He had smashed the window with a tire iron. He was reaching his arm through the jagged glass, fumbling for the door handle, trying to unlock the car from the inside. "Open it! Open it!" The first man yelled from the driver's side. He was pounding on my window now, pulling at the handle. My brain was vibrating with panic. I scrambled over the center console, jamming my key into the ignition. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped them. "Get him out!" the voice screamed. I grabbed the keys, shoved them in, and twisted. The engine roared to life. The back door clicked. The lock disengaged. The man in the back yanked the door open. I slammed my foot on the gas. The SUV lurched forward, tires spinning in the dirt. The back door swung wild and open. I heard a shout as the man lost his grip and fell away. I tore down the trail, branches scraping the sides of my vehicle. As I hit the main road, my headlights swept across the brush. There it was, the black truck. It was parked deep in the bushes, lights off, hidden near the entrance of the trail. They had followed me for hundreds of miles. They had watched me get gas. They had waited, trailing far enough behind so I wouldn't see them, until I stopped for the night. I drove with the back door flapping open for a mile until I was sure nobody was behind me. I pulled over, slammed it shut, and drove until I hit the Alaskan border. I reported it to the Mounties, but I had no license plate, no faces, just a black truck in a province the size of California. I made it to Alaska. I finished my trip, but I slept in hotels the rest of the way. I still think about that campsite I found that morning, the torn tent, the scattered clothes. I think about the people who were staying there. Did they get away like I did? Or did the men in the black truck catch them? And most terrifying of all, what were they planning to do with me once they got that door open? They didn't want the car. They wanted the driver. Host/narrator. The woods are a place of beauty, but they are also a place of hiding. When you go out there, you leave the rules of society behind. If you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a trip into the darkness. Let me know in the comments. If you were in the fire lookout, would you have opened the door that first night? Stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next one.